Hey, true crime fanatics, this is Claire.
And I'm Andy.
You're tuned in to the Homicide Hobbies podcast, which is a podcast for people who love to hear about the horrendous crimes that people commit. Enjoy. Well, what do we have today? Or where are we going?
Well, today I have a cold. And we will also be in a place that I found while looking through Jason's app that he plays chess on. I saw their flag and then I was like, whoa. And then I was like, hey, what's the name of that place? And then when I saw what it was called, I did laugh. And I know you need more than that. So their flag has a
Trisket?
A Triskelion? No, a Triskelion? Hang on.
So far, this is riveting.
So it's an ancient symbol consisting of 3 intertwined spirals or legs, often associated with the Celtic culture and various other historical and modern contexts. It's a symbol of motion, progress, and the cycle of life, death, and rebirth.
What is it?
It's called a
Triskelion.
A Triskelion.
I heard that. You might as well put that in there, because
I intend to. Anyway, this place has a national dish called spuds and herring.
Soap?
Taters.
Oh, I heard suds. Spuds.
Spuds.
Your boogers are real plugged up, so it doesn't sound like the words.
Spuds and herring is their national dish.
Ireland?
Nope. New Zealand is credited for being the first self-governing nation to grant women the right to vote in 1893, but the place we'll be discussing today is actually the first place in the world to give some women the right to vote in 1881, and the sum constitutes women that were property owners.
Greece?
Nope. This place still has an operating horse-drawn tramway through their capital.
Kentucky?
The last one is the Bee Gees were born here.
Florida?
You're an idiot. No. Today, we'll be going to the Isle of Man.
That was close.
So I sent you a picture of their flag. It looks like kind of like Sicily's flag, where it's 3 legs, like joined at the hip in a circular motion.
All right.
You see it?
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. But I saw that flag and I saw that it was called the Isle of Man, and I was like, Isle of Man murder. We'll be discussing 2 murders that take place on the...
What year are we in?
Well, today we'll be discussing 2 murders that take place on the Isle of Man, which, by the way, is not part of the UK. The Isle of Man is not directly governed by the UK. It's a self-governed British Crown dependency, meaning the...
But what year are we in?
Hold on. Meaning the UK is responsible for the island's defense and foreign affairs, and the Isle of Man has its own parliament, government, they even have their own currency and their own laws. The Isle of Man is located in the Irish Sea near the British Isles, and it's almost smack dab in the middle of the Irish Sea. It's nearly equal distance from England, Scotland, Wales, and Ireland. And in fact, on a clear day on the top of the island's only mountain, you can see what locals refer to as the 7 kingdoms, which is the Isle of Man. You can see the entire island. England, Ireland, Scotland, Wales, heaven and the sea. It's 30 miles by 33 miles in size, approximately 227 square miles, with a population of roughly 80,000, give or take.
But what year was that?
And to put that into perspective with the U.S.
Is this thing on?
I'm ignoring you. Listen.
But if you tell me a population size as of what year?
It doesn't matter. Just listen.
It does matter.
It doesn't matter. What is you knowing the year change the population size?
Because if our story is along that same time period, but if you're going to tell me in 1800s there were 12 people there, that's a big difference.
Well, then I wouldn't be telling you that there's 80,000 people there. And to put that in perspective with the U.S., Rhode Island is the smallest U.S. state at a whopping 1,214 square miles. And they have 2,828 police officers. Wyoming has the least number of residents in the U.S. with close to 600,000, and they have 2,300 officers. The Isle of Man, with their 80,000 residents, they have roughly 244 officers to police that teeny tiny land.
But is it because they're all relatives?
And what you've been asking for, We will be traveling to the Isle of Man in February of 2002.
Was that so hard?
Get your notes ready. This is a lot to absorb, so if you need me to
No. I don't have a
repeat
pen.
anything, or well, just pay attention then. So February 9th, 2002, police have been called out to look for two youths, and they discovered 16-year-old Samantha Barton brutally murdered in her living room. Her bra had been cut from her body. She had been sexually assaulted. She was repeatedly stabbed. Samantha had been brutalized and tortured for what appeared to be hours before she was murdered with a tied shoelace around her throat. After she died, her killer positioned her mutilated body in a humiliating position before inserting objects into her rectum. The following day, a person cutting through a thicket, so while they're dealing with Samantha's living room and her whatever happened with her, a person was cutting through the thicket and stumbled upon Samantha's best friend, 16-year-old George Green. He, too, had been savagely stabbed and murdered by strangulation with a shoelace.
Did they know he was missing when they were dealing with her body?
So I think they went out to check on the two of them, and they found her. And then while they were processing her living room, somebody stumbled onto George. And George was roughly a half mile from Samantha's Lease Lodge care home. His green boxers had been cut from his body. Both Samantha and George had been brutally sexually assaulted both before and after their murders.
So a pretty sick ticket.
Yes. This tiny police force was overwhelmed, so they brought in help from the mainland to assist in tracking down this dangerous individual who viciously killed two teenagers. Samantha Barton, she was born May 18th, 1985 in Ireland. She suffered with spina bifida. So I don't know a lot about spina bifida, so I did look that up. And it's caused by an incomplete closure of the neural tube the first few weeks of pregnancy. And this neural tube normally develops into the brain and spinal cord. And while the exact cause is not fully understood, several factors are believed to play a role, including genetics, nutritional, and environmental factors. Now, spina bifida itself has 3 different degrees of severity. The mildest and most common often show no visible signs other than a small gap in the vertebrae. The next type involves a fluid-filled sac protruding from the back, but the spinal cord remains inside. And then the most severe form of spina bifida is when the spinal cord and nerves are contained in a visible sac.
So which did she have?
I'm going to go with the most mild, and some of the symptoms, it varies depending on the severity and the location of the defect, but the most common symptoms are usually problems with movement, sensation issues, being incontinent with either your bowel or bladder.
That's the most mild?
Mm-hmm. And potentially hydrocephalitis, which is buildup of fluid on the brain. And then some individuals may also experience orthopedic issues, learning difficulties, and other complications. So not a fun thing. Samantha's mother, Rose Burnell, moved to the Isle of Man in search of a better life for her family after Samantha's father left the family home when Samantha was 7. By age 10, Samantha was put into a care, I don't know what to call it. So I know in the US it'd be putting them into the foster care system, or giving them social services control over the child. But for the Isle of Man, they say they put them into care. So,
well, it could be a care facility.
Well, by 10, Samantha was put into a care facility because her mother could no longer cope with Samantha's temper tantrums. And while Samantha's mom loved her daughter, she felt she wasn't able to provide her daughter with all the love and attention she needed, and she was desperate for help. Samantha had moments of being kind and happy and considerate, but when she was faced with anything that was challenging, she would become aggressive, self-centered, and immature, and have a violent outburst.
So 10.
Samantha lacked self-esteem, and in June of 1997, when Samantha was just 12, she ended up being sent to an adult jail for a week after assaulting a social worker and causing criminal damage.
She was 12?
Yeah.
What kind of damage?
I don't know. It just said that it caused...
Like to property or the social worker?
Both. She assaulted the social worker and I'm assuming destroyed shit in the process.
Okay.
After bouncing from different care homes, Samantha was placed at Lease Lodge on September 3rd, 2001. Lease Lodge reads like a wannabe juvenile detention center compound type situation. And I say compound type situation because from what I read about this place, there were several cottages that they refer to as self-contained bed sits. So So I looked up what that means. And that's simply a house, and each bedroom is basically rented out to another person. And then the common areas like the kitchen and the living room and the bathrooms are shared by everyone in that house. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So Lease Lodge Care Center, it sounds like had a couple of houses, and that's just what they did. And it was highly criticized in regards to their
So you're going to
lackadaisical
say
approach.
laxatives.
No. To their lackadaisical approach to dealing with out of control youth and juveniles just ran wild, causing chaos in the community. There were no care plans. There were no placement agreements. There was no support packages. There were no boundaries set for Samantha specifically, no sort of structure for her life. And it wasn't just Samantha. In 2002, the authorities had what they referred to as 15 hardcore young people at the Lease Care Lodge that were prolific offenders. Most of the teens were abusing drugs and alcohol, and sometimes those offenders would go missing from the care facility. And other times there would be more youth offenders missing.
Is this why they don't realize when they're missing?
Do what?
Because they can go missing?
So I think because they can run amok and do whatever, they are reported as missing. But there's times that they reported that there were more kids missing from this facility than there were even officers on duty, which is why I started the case telling you that they have a very small police department to try to run this very small island, but with so many kids just kind of running amok.
Well, I wouldn't think it was the police department running a youth thing.
No, but if they're reported missing, it's the police department's job to go find them. And when those youths are off...
I feel like it's a low priority anyway, because if they go up and missing randomly, that it's just they turn up eventually rather than like a headhunt.
And along with them going missing, there'd be an uptick in reported drug use, robberies, stealing of vehicles, and general criminal mischief. The Lease Lodge care home was described by one resident of the Isle of Man as gangs of children on the loose. The teens would often rob the locals to pay for their drugs and alcohol. That's Lease Lodge Manor, or Lease Lodge Care Facility. The other murdered youth, George Green, he was born December 27th, 1985. George was born into a loving family. He was particularly close with his father. The father and son would go fishing together and walk the family dogs in the evening. George was a good boy and was not in trouble until he fell in with the older, rowdy teens when he was just 12. Around this age, George became rude and demanding towards his mother. He also was becoming rude and disrespectful at school. And in 1998, George's name was first put into the Child Protection Register, but it wasn't for George. It was because his family was already involved with social services for several years because of George's sister, Catherine. By 1999, at age 13, George was voluntarily placed in care after he was branded by a local magistrate as a one-man crime wave. I kind of rolled my eyes at that. He's 13. He's not even a man. How's he a one-man crime wave? He's a one-child.
He's old enough to have his bar mitzvah.
You're so weird. George had committed a string of offenses such as attempted robbery, assault, 2 burglaries, 3 counts of threatening behavior, criminal damage, and taking a car without consent, which made me think it must have been like a family vehicle or something, because otherwise I think it'd be like Grand Theft Auto, not taking a vehicle without consent. George had a social worker that witnessed the decline in George's attitude. As time went on, she noticed George no longer seemed to care about what was happening with him. She did make a note in his file saying it was very sad to witness. George, along with being rude and demanding, he also became aggressive. And much like Samantha, George bounced between several care homes. It was really hard keeping track of everywhere these kids were. So I didn't really even try, but the last place that I saw that George was assigned to was the Eden Care Home. From what I gather, it was not on the Isle of Man. George was thriving there. He hated it, but he was thriving. Since it was located in the UK, on the mainland, and his family lived on the Isle of Man, in December of 2001, George was granted permission to return to the Isle of Man to spend Christmas and New Year's with his family. The only flaw with that was George refused to return to the Eden Care Home that he was supposed to return to. Okay, so he was supposed to go back on January 7th, right?
Mm-hmm.
He refused. That same day, he was arrested for handling stolen goods. Then on the 16th of January, he was arrested for public order offense. I assume maybe like a disturbing the peace kind of charge. Then on the 17th, the very next day, he was arrested for burglary. Then January 20th, he was arrested for theft of a mobile phone. Then on the 31st, he was arrested again for theft of goods from a store totaling 125 pounds. Then on February 6th, he was arrested for shoplifting and public order offense. All of his arrests resulted in him being bailed out to his mother's address. Both of these teens' families tried to do their best for their kids, but they were just wildly out of control. At Samantha's last court appearance, she was given a suspended sentence after admitting to having possession of ecstasy, marijuana, assaulting a police officer, burglary, stealing from vehicles, criminal damage, joyriding in the context that your husband referenced. So, riding around in a stolen vehicle. I'm guessing she was with George when he took.
Or just everybody's driving around in shit they shouldn't be in.
Right. She was admitted to handling stolen goods and using threatening words or behaviors. So, to me, it sounded like the authorities and parents just didn't know what to do with these Hellraiser children. George, social services tried to return him to his previous care facility because he was doing better there. Here, visiting with his pals at Lease Lodge, he was wildly out of control. By the time Samantha was 16, her care home at Lease Lodge, she was by herself. So even though it had multiple bedrooms that other people could stay in, because she was very difficult to live with and get along with, she was by herself. Her house became known as the Party House. February 8th, 2002, the day before Samantha and George were found murdered, she invited George, her BFF, another friend who's not relevant to this case, so I'm not going to mention his name because he is a minor, and 21-year-old Peter Newbery. They all came over, drink some alcohol, smoke some weed, and in general just do things they shouldn't have been. Now, Peter, he was an on-again, off-again boyfriend of Samantha's. He began his relationship with Samantha at one of the care homes that they were both placed in when she was 12 and Peter was 16. He too was a troubled young man. He was born December 8th, 1980. He was 21 and no stranger to law enforcement. His school-age days, he was constantly in trouble, and after a string of violent offenses at school, he was suspended, and that's when he was voluntarily placed into a care facility. He bounced from facility to facility, and by 16, Peter was even placed in a bed and breakfast by social services because they just didn't know what to do with this kid. And then they reported him as living independently from that bed and breakfast. And it looks, from everything I read, it looks like they just kind of left him there to do whatever havoc he could do, footed the bill, and then as soon as he hit of age, cut him loose. I could be wrong, but that's the way everything reads, is he was just, nobody could keep tabs on this guy. He was getting more and more violent. During this time, Peter racked up criminal charges, mostly violent offenses as well as drug offenses. Peter was handed light sentence after light sentence. March 24th, 2000, for example, Peter was convicted for possession of a Class A and Class B drugs. Not honor roll grades, but drugs. For those that aren't familiar with the drug classifications, because I wasn't. I mean, it makes sense, but I wasn't sure what was what. Class A are the more serious ones, and they carry the more harsh penalties. You can do life if you have enough of it. A Class A would be heroin, cocaine, crack, ecstasy, LSD, magic mushrooms, not Magic Mike.
Oy.
Yeah. Methadone and crystal meth. Class B would be weed, synthetic cannabinoids. I guess your synthetic weeds.
Cannabises.
Yeah. Ketamine, amphetamine, codeine, barbiturates, GHB, and GBLs, stuff like that. But it's also important to note that if it's a Class B drug that's prepared for injection, it escalates it from a Class B to a Class A substance.
Just like a gun and the commission of a felony.
And then a Class C, being the least strictly controlled, is your tranquilizers and narcotics like clozapam, diazepam or Valium, hydrocodone or Vicodin, and hallucinogenic substances. Stuff like that. But Peter, now being convicted for having possession of Class A and B drugs. And he was also convicted for using threatening words or behavior. He was only given 2 years probation.
But is that under the hope that they can rehabilitate the youth so that they're not piles of shit when they're adults?
Yes. So that was at the end of March, right? By July, they learn little Mr. Peter, who's on probation, was dealing drugs. So his
Well, I feel like he needs to be in a drug program, not a go live here program.
I don't know. He's a dealer more than he's a user.
I think what it is because the island is such limited resources. They really didn't have options to deal with this level of out of control.
But then it's not a treatment.
I know. I agree.
And I would say if it's a umbrella or falls under that of like care needed kind of thing, would it not have some sort of sister program?
It should.
You should.
But once they find out that he's dealing drugs, his probation was revoked and his little butt was put in jail in September 2000. So he's out wreaking havoc. By November 2001, he's arrested for raping a 14-year-old girl, but they weren't sure what to do with him because the girl didn't want to be put through the sexual assault, like the internal exam. So they weren't sure what to do with him because it becomes a he said, she said. He was bonded out or let out until he was supposed to go to court. And what police were unaware of is when Peter was a minor, he'd been arrested in 1997 for unlawful sexual intercourse with a 13-year-old girl. So he's got a thing for the younger gals and putting his penis where he shouldn't. Yeah. He used to work at a slaughterhouse, but he was unemployed. So that's when he decided.
What's with you in cases where people worked at a slaughterhouse?
I don't know. He decided since he was an out-of-work slaughterhouse employee, he would just sell drugs to the at-risk youths on the island of Man.
It's less commute time if all of his clients are in one place.
Right. So, as we have established, he's just not a good dude, right?
Yes.
Now we're going to go back to the February 8th date with everybody at Samantha's house. She was showing them that she scored a rock of crack cocaine.
I was going to say, it's granite.
I don't know what all took place. Nobody will ever know. But everybody, I guess, at some point leaves Samantha's house. But Peter returns that night with a vile plan he wanted to put into motion. He ended up attacking Samantha in her own home with a knife. He stabbed her and slashed her a total of 47 times. He stabbed her with such force that the knife sliced down into her bones, and then he tortured and raped Samantha for around 7 hours before tying that shoelace tightly around her throat, strangling her to death. And then after positioning her body and putting things in her rectum, Peter left Samantha's home, leaving a note on her front door, pretending to be Samantha, stating she went to court and then to see her sister. Meanwhile, she was lying dead on her living room floor. And somewhere in the mix of brutalizing Samantha, Peter raped and stabbed George and then ditched his body about 1,000 feet away from Samantha's home.
How did he attack both of them?
So I have that here too, because I don't understand.
Like, were they all drugged and drunk and maybe somebody passed out somewhere else, so it wasn't like they were all in the same room, maybe?
Or I thought maybe it was like he'd already started assaulting and Samantha's pretty slashed up.
And George arrived.
Or came out of a back room or something and tried to flee, which is how he got 1,000 feet away.
Yeah.
Maybe Peter chased him down. But once he got George, he cut off George's boxers and sexually assaulted the teen before tying another shoelace around George's throat, strangling him to death. Once Peter goes to court, he claims he didn't rape and murder Samantha or George. He says that he was a small-time drug dealer and that Samantha had stolen a large amount of drugs from someone else, and that's probably what led to her death.
Sure.
And that he couldn't have killed them because he was at home doing drugs out in his shed when they were murdered.
How does he know when they were murdered?
I guess he's saying that whole night.
Which night?
Right? Except the police found a knife in Peter's possession that had George's blood on it. And the shoelace that was knotted around Samantha's throat had Peter's DNA on that. And then after a 6-week trial, Peter was found guilty of both murders. And since Peter won't own up to the murders, police can only speculate as to why And that's where the other kid that was at her house.
I'd say he probably did do drugs, and then it's rotted the brain. Barely pieces he had left. And nobody makes good decisions while out of their mind.
Yeah. Peter apparently wanted the crack that Samantha had, and she wouldn't give it to him. And some speculate, just like you did, that Peter possibly didn't act alone, because it is something to consider. Because if Samantha and George were both at Samantha's, how did one man take down two capable teens alone, unless they were so drunk or drugged up that, it's...
Well, I could see it just being a case of... It strikes me as since it was a naughty girl, maybe she was partying the night before too, so it doesn't take a whole lot to make her sleepy.
Yeah.
So he could have been doing whatever he was doing, and then as he kills her, if George wakes up and starts doing the run-in, he takes after George and kills George, and then when he gets back to the house, that's when he does his stuff to her body.
I agree. And the acting deemster, which I was like, what? So I looked that up. It's an appointed judge.
Oh.
And since they have their own government and laws and things, they call him an acting deemster.
All right.
So Deemster Faucus said, I've read the psychiatric and psychological reports on you, and they make sorry reading. There is nothing in them which serves as any form of mitigation for what you did. Their content gives a chilling insight into the sort of young man you are and how, leading a life of self-centeredness and violence, you have come to commit these, your most serious offenses. You have shown not the slightest remorse for taking these young lives, and whatever lives they were leading, they did not deserve to be treated in the way you treated them or to be killed. And Peter was sentenced to life, but just life, meaning he would be up for parole after 20 years. And to assist with the mathing on that, he served his time and was up for his first parole in late October of 2023. And thankfully, he was denied parole. But the way the legal system works, apparently everywhere, is every 2 years, pieces of trash like Peter Newbery are up for parole.
Well, hopefully they keep him on the island.
Dude, he was in the UK, and they put him back on the island since it's one of those, if he does get released, they're just going to put him back on the island. Peter was up for parole again this past March of 2025. The only peace of mind I can think to tell Samantha and George's families is, as long as Peter continues to skirt around taking responsibility for his vile actions, he'll never be released from prison. Because the way the legal system works is, in order to be rehabilitated, he needs to accept responsibility for his grotesque actions. Let alone the fact that he's a serial rapist. But this piece of trash will be up for release or up for parole again in 2 years, so 2027.
Ugh.
Yeah. And I know I made the Isle of Man sound like an awful place, but they have a murder rate of 0.
Not anymore.
Well, after all of this, they have a very low crime rate. And the Lease Lodge care facility, yeah, that shit got closed down after this.
That's because nobody was really running it.
They weren't. I think it was just a place to dump these kids until they turned 18 and then be like, okay, you're adults. Good luck. But I feel sorry for their families, because I couldn't imagine having a kid that's out of control. You don't know how to help them. You think they're getting the help they need, and they're really just getting worse.
Yeah. Well, I hope
he stays where he belongs.
Well, it'd be nice if there was no chance of parole. But yeah. I hope he stays in that area. If he does.
I think it's crazy that he was already, like, he's out on bond or out on bail for raping another teen. Who, by the way, that 14-year-old was also in care.
Well, it was before trial, right?
Yeah.
But you got to do, well,
I was
going to say innocent before, or you got to be proven guilty. So it's just like, they can't, but that's ours. I don't know the laws of Isle of Man.
But that is Peter Newbery and the murder of Samantha Barton and George Green. And that's all I've got.
Thank you for listening to Homicide Hobbies. I'm Claire.
I'm Andy.
Follow us each week to get your fix of the atrocities that occur in true crime. And don't forget to tell people about us and rate us if you like us. But don't rate us if you didn't. Just change the channel.